What do Richard Rohr, taking mushrooms, and embracing liberation theology all have in common? All of these things were discussed in this conversation. In this conversation, Kevin and I dive into the intersections of liberation theology and Christian mysticism, exploring how these traditions inform and enrich each other. We also discuss the role of mystics in embodying acceptance and faith, the significance of rituals and spirituality, and the paradox of the cosmic Christ alongside the liberating Jesus. And if that sounds like hoopla, I hope when you hear this conversation, you'll be like, oh, yeah, I get it. We also get to hear about Kevin's spiritual journey, beginning with an awakening experience at 18 that led him to explore the depths of faith and spirituality. And this entire conversation is centered around his new book, The Cosmic Christ and the Concrete Jesus. It's an excellent introduction to the significant thinkers of Christian mysticism and liberation theology, particularly the Black theology branch of liberation theology. Kevin's insights challenge conventional Christian beliefs and advocate for a broader understanding of spirituality rooted in direct experience and self-awareness. I really appreciate this conversation. I really appreciate Kevin's energy, and I hope that something that is said here will be something that is helpful for you in your journey. If you would like to continue this discussion with Kevin, I would encourage you to 1, check out his new book that is available on Amazon, The Cosmic Christ and Concrete Jesus. You can also check out his other work on his website, kevinsweeneynow.com. And if you would like to continue this conversation with me, you can shoot me an email at hargonw@gmail.com. I hope you find this conversation to be helpful. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for this conversation. Thank you so much for your book. I've been reading it throughout the week, just finished it today. Good stuff, really good stuff. And I can't wait to discuss it. But before we get into that, I want to know more about who you are and why did you write this book?
Mm. Well, who I am and why I wrote this, while connected, are definitely two very distinct things. I'll say why I wrote it. My wife and I started and led a church here in Honolulu, Hawaii, for about 10 years. And near the end of it, we transitioned out of that role in 2022. And I was at a walk around that time. I was walking at a park right across. I don't know if you can tell, I'm on the 37th floor of a building. This is like downtown Honolulu right by me. I'm like 2 blocks from the water. So I have an amazing park across the street where I walk a lot. And I was just walking one day and I thought, I want to write a book about Jesus. And it was really like, okay, I have this unexpected awakening moment at 18, feel some pastoral calling in my 20s, respond to that, lead a church for 10 years, but along the way have gone through so many movements, so many evolutionary stages of changes in my faith and in consciousness. You see like this, then you don't see like this, and you're taking things apart. Then you see like this for a while, then you take it apart again. I had been through so many stages and read so many things, especially read so many things that would make it difficult for other people to still consider themselves a Christian or feel comfortable calling themselves a Christian. I'm like, oh, I get that. And I understand all of those things and have no judgment on people.
Yeah.
But I think, why is it so organic and natural for me to still call myself a Christian after the past 20 years or so? And so I think that as the beginning point, I can say more about that, but I think that was like, what do I really think? How do I hold this together? Because I don't have conventional beliefs about a lot of things. I didn't lead in a conventional way. I preached for 10 years. I never once talked about doctrine ever, So I'm like, how did that work for me? So the book is not, here's an idea I came up with. I'm like, this is really how I hold this together.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
So 10 years of ministry, 10 years of, so tell me more about the awakening experience a little bit and maybe how you got into ministry in light of that awakening experience.
Yeah. So my very short story is I have this profound, I grew up in Los Angeles. I had this profound existential crisis when I was about 17. You know, I was that kid who had everything, but it felt like nothing. And
Mm-hmm.
not because my family was ultra wealthy, more because I was out there getting it. You know, playing basketball. I'm supposed to play in college. I've been selling weed since I was a little kid. I've been getting
Mm-hmm.
high. So to me, like the world of money, hip hop, sports, attention, I'm like, I'm like an adult at that
Mm.
time. Like
Uh-huh.
at 17, I'm like, this is like, you know, the joke where people like spill something. They're like, I remember my first beer. Like if someone spills something at the table, it's like a joke. I have that as an adult when I see like other people like doing drugs or they're doing
Mm.
like coke in their 30s. I'm like, oh, I remember being 16. You know, I always have that like in my
Uh-huh.
head
Mm.
because it was things happened so quickly for me. I
Mm.
just grew up really quick like
Mm.
that. And while I was excelling on the surface and everything, deep down, I could not escape this like inner restlessness.
Mm.
Why do I need more of this? What am I
Yeah.
really doing? Am I really this? My spiritual journey began with a radical form of self-awareness. That's
Mm.
where it started for me. I never knew evangelicals existed growing up. I didn't know there was Christians around me. I never heard of youth group. I didn't ever even heard of it. You know,
Uh-huh.
that just wasn't my world.
Wow.
So we were just, you know, outside doing whatever we were doing. But it was that radical sort of developing a third person perspective outside of yourself, reflecting back on yourself. Why am
Mm.
I doing what I'm doing? What is driving me? Why am I
Yeah.
so obsessed with basketball? Do I love basketball? Or I didn't have the language at the time, but does my ego just need what basketball does for me because it makes me feel special because other people are telling me I'm good?
Yeah.
And if it's that, then, oh, is my whole sense of feeling valuable or good about myself contingent upon other people telling me I'm special because I do something well? What if that something's taken away?
Mm.
What if I don't do that?
Uh-huh.
What if they don't think I'm cool anymore? What if this status falls away, right? And at 17, I'm like, what is this? What am I
Yeah.
doing? And I think I was really honest. I've always been haunted by honesty
Mm.
in a good way. I'm really not happy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm tired of getting high every day. I'm so
Mm.
tired. I'm so tired of needing to do another thing to perform for others for them to tell me I'm good or valuable. Yeah, I'm
Mm-hmm.
so exhausted. At 7, I'm like burnt out at 18. Like those
Wow.
movies where somebody's like 40 and they're like, I'm
Yeah.
tired of it. I'm
Uh-huh.
like, I was 18, like I'm exhausted from this.
Yeah.
And all of that whole journey led me to ask a lot of questions. And you know, I was doing a lot of mushrooms at the time, and I would say mushrooms were very much like a spiritual guide for me as a
Mm.
teenager when I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have any. And then while I was on mushrooms around Christmas time when I was 18, I have this spontaneous, immediate awakening with God,
Mm.
directly transformative, direct experience of love and light. And really at the center of that is this profound experience of being seen by
Mm.
love. Everything I ever wanted from other people that never actually worked was a direct, oh, it's coming from the source of life
Yeah.
itself.
Uh-huh.
That, oh, this isn't about performance. This isn't about being good. Like spirituality for me was never about morality. I never thought about that. I had no shame and guilt around anything in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I had zero empathy and emotions at all when I was young, which was the scary part.
Mm.
But this direct experience of being seen by this loving set of eyes at the center of the universe changed
Mm-hmm.
my life. I was like, this is
Mm.
it. I don't need any of these other things. Quit basketball, didn't play in college, walked away from it, walked away from music I was doing, stopped doing hard drugs immediately on the spot in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Never did it again. I never did psychedelics again.
Wow.
Yeah, it took me a couple years to quit smoking weed at that point in my life.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, that was the background of from the very beginning for me, my initial awakening in my faith was not based on beliefs. It
Mm-hmm.
was based on embodiment and experience.
Yeah.
It wasn't, do you believe X, Y, and Z about God? I didn't think about that.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't, do you respond to the sinner's prayer because you understand now Jesus did this thing for you that makes you right with God? No, there was zero of that. It was just direct. Like other people are trying to give you a map to the ocean. I all
Yeah.
of a sudden was just in the ocean.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I'm like, I guess this is it. And my life has always been a response to that. And then
Wow.
within a few years, I moved to Hawaii the next year. My girlfriend at the time was out here,
Mm-hmm.
who's now my wife. We've been together for a very long time. And within a few years, I just had this like, I think God's calling me to be a pastor. And I've never met a pastor before, really.
Mhm.
But I think that's what God's calling me to do. And I started exploring that,
Uh-huh.
ended up at a Foursquare conservative Bible college in
Mhm.
California, went to Fuller after, and the journey kind of kept going.
Mm.
Yeah.
I'm sure there was some cognitive dissonance there because you had
Mm,
this experience that
mm,
is probably beyond words, and then you
exactly.
get into this training where you're given words, you're given a structure, and you're probably like, what the heck is this? Like you're able to see holes in it as soon as you
Uh,
receive it because how does this relate to my experience? The
uh,
experience of being seen and loved and heard by this
uh.
presence in the center of the universe. So
Yeah,
tell me
there was
more
a
about that.
yeah, Bible college was very interesting.
Yeah.
Foursquare is like a Pentecostal denomination, but still very conservative theologically. And overall, like I had a great experience there. Great
Mhm.
people. I enjoyed my time. And on the one hand, because I had no like Bible background really of like studying it, I was just so excited to learn that I'm like, when they're giving me a fundamentalist evangelical foundation, I was hyped for it
Mm.
took about a year and a half, 2 years. I was really into it.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, like context and scripture and hermeneutics, I
Mhm.
never even
Uh,
heard of this. I can't believe people
yeah.
know this much. I loved
Yeah.
it,
Mm.
because I am for people familiar with the Enneagram, I'm a 5, which means I'm
Mm.
oriented to my mind. So you give me
Uh-huh.
large systems of knowledge, like I'll just take off from me. I'm
Mm.
lift off. I could do
Yeah.
that forever.
Uh-huh.
And so on the one hand, building that foundation was great. And I look back at Bible college and think about the Dalai Lama's quote where he's like, you have to learn the rules to creatively break them.
Mhm. Mm.
That's what I needed. Ironically enough, much to the chagrin of my former professors, the foundation, that solid foundation of conservative confessional Christianity gave me the foundation to build and to keep expanding and
Mhm.
evolving. But
Yeah.
without that, I would not have been able to do that the same way. So I'm super grateful for that.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, when it comes to when you begin with direct experience, like when people talk about mystics, like what is a mystic? A mystic at the core is somebody whose faith and whose life is not based on abstract beliefs about
Uh-huh.
God, but it's based on direct experience of the sacred. However, people define that after. It's a direct knowing. And for the mystics, I tell people, for mystics, knowing is not primarily knowing, it's being known.
Mm.
It's
Mm.
not seeing, it's the experience of being seen. That's a
Uh-huh.
whole different mode of knowing than the
Yeah.
cognitive way we master knowledge. Uh, But when I think about my journey beginning with radical self-awareness and experience, I remember being in my first ever class, and it's basically like, I don't even remember. It's like spiritual life. It's like do devotions and I don't know what else, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Like read your Bible devotionally. I remember I'm like, it was in the class. I'm like, you're giving all these kids, and I was a kid at the time too. That's just how I thought. I'm like, you're giving all these kids a foundation for spiritual formation. Never once did you ever mention self-awareness?
Mhm.
Ever. I couldn't believe it.
Mm.
I'm like, how do you expect any of these kids to transform that which they are unaware needs to be transformed?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Where is none of it wasn't radical transformation.
Mm.
It was growing in your knowledge of the Bible more,
Uh-huh.
and I'm like, that isn't the same thing.
Mm.
Transformation and Bible knowledge is not the same thing. Hopefully they
Yeah.
can be a part of the same whole journey. Great.
Mhm.
But that's not the same thing. And I was surprised, or at least later on looking back, at how little mention of self-awareness, radical transformation, any form of shadow work, deep
Mhm.
interior journeys almost was not a part of it at all. I
Yeah.
found that to be
Mm.
extremely lacking. So,
Wow.
but I still loved it. Within 2 years, I started reading beyond what they were offering me.
Mhm.
Started somehow come across Richard Rohr and other like
Mhm.
progressive people back then. And I'm like, oh, there's a much bigger world out here. So
Yeah.
everyone can, it was almost like I grew up in a wild, outside in the wild.
Mhm.
And for 2 years, they're like, come into our kingdom and learn from us. And I'm like, this is awesome. Thank
Mhm.
you. These are wonderful people. But then also I say, well, for me, this might be a permanent residence for you, but for me, it was a temporary settlement.
Mhm.
And it was great for that, but I don't think we're supposed to stay here forever. You
Yeah.
guys seem to think you're supposed to stay here and build a world
Yeah.
like that looks like this. I think this is a starting point for the rest of the future. And
That's
that's how I
right.
took it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, like I said before we talked, before we started the conversation, I want to go back and forth between big picture questions, but also concrete because I want to get to know who
Sure.
you are. So,
Mm.
a small question: what's a song that's been on repeat for you lately?
Mm. Man, I would have to my Spotify will always tell you the truth.
Uh-huh.
You know, I would say I'm 40. Like my wife and I both just turned 40, and I
Mm,
grew up heavily immersed in hip hop. It's
mm.
still 95% of what I listen to is rap. I
Yeah.
just don't
Uh-huh.
listen to other music really. It's
Yeah.
rare. I just
Mm.
can't. I try, I
Uh-huh.
can't. And it's hard for me to listen to new artists, and not because I'm like super old school hater of like everything. It's hip hop only counts between like 93 and 2003 because that was my
Uh-huh.
era of coming of age. L- uh, the artist Larry June, he's based out of
Mm,
Oakland, the Bay Area, a rapper. He's probably one of my favorite newer to me artists who I listen to a lot. So he just came out with an album this year with 2 Chains
mm,
called Life is Beautiful. And is he's just like super laid back, like a good vibe that helps capture where I'm at in my life.
mm.
His is like I get money, I stay out the way, and I do all this like fly shit basically. And for
Uh-huh.
me, it's like even our version of what that is different. It still captures a lot of the essence of where I'm at in my life too.
Mm,
So yeah, just that whole album, Life is Beautiful with him, to me, I'm like, is probably my favorite album this year.
mm. So
Yeah.
Larry June, I never heard of Larry June.
Yeah, yeah. He's very untraditional, like Bay Area, like not like a
Mm-hmm.
lot of other artists. But yeah, if you look him up, his album with 2 Chainz, Life is Beautiful, is great. So I think it's all produced by The Alchemist, who I love.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that's the one for me.
Awesome. That's good stuff, man.
Yeah,
Looking forward to checking that out. So
yeah.
your book is called The Cosmic Christ and the Concrete Jesus. So I want to give you an opportunity to break down who is the cosmic Christ. You
Mm.
do this very well in the book, but who is the cosmic
Yeah,
Christ?
the I think there is this cosmic, benevolent, all-pervasive, immanent, animating force, cosmic glue that holds all things together, cosmic face of God, that in all of its wonder and majesty and beauty and goodness, the name Jesus alone does not capture it.
Mm,
Jesus, as if depending on how much of a confessional Christian you are,
mhm.
I'm depending on who you talk to, probably don't fit within that as a whole, but I am a Christian.
Yeah.
And, you know, when they say in the incarnation, the fullness of what I just described was present in Jesus, I'm like, yes. Yes to the incarnation. Yes to
Mm,
spirit and matter becoming one.
uh-huh.
Yes to divinity and humanity. I love it. But
Mhm.
the mystic also wants to say in our vision of the cosmic Christ, yes to that in Jesus, putting it all together there, but
Uh-huh.
also true for the rest of reality as
Yeah.
well.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever is true about Jesus is also true about the incarnational reality of this moment and
Mm,
this world.
that's
This
right.
is the fullness of spirit and matter. This is the fullness of humanity and God, all right here.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the biblical writers speak of that which is embedded within everything, filling the entire universe, existing before all things,
Uh-huh.
holding all things together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Christ is that which holds all things together, draws humanity forward in history, fills everything, and remains this universal drive that guides our own individual evolution as human beings and our
Mm-hmm.
evolution of the universe as a whole. Um, and so, what I want to say is, I mean, we could just say God, and I'm comfortable with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think the cosmic Christ captures something about the expansiveness of that, that which has been true eternally and
Mm-hmm.
is true right now. It's the universal that was fully present in the particular of Jesus. It's the eternal that took form in Jesus at one
Mm-hmm.
point. It's the ever present flow of everything that came in its fullness in Jesus. And I think it doesn't seem right theologically for me to say Jesus when you're talking about all that.
Mm,
That which was present in Jesus but was existed before Jesus of Nazareth
mm-hmm.
and is beyond Jesus of Nazareth. That's just the relationship of the particular and the universal that's always at work.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
And
the Christ is just that which holds all things together and is also benevolent.
mm.
I love absurdity, and I love absurdism and comedy, like the Eric Andre show. If anyone see it, it's insane. Like I love absurdity, and I'm like a benevolent absurdist. I'm like life is absurd because it's just so strange and
Yeah.
wonderful.
Uh-huh.
But I'm a benevolent because but at the center of this is a loving, good force that is with us and for us
Hmm.
as well. I'm not a nihilist at all.
Yeah.
It's absurd and insane, but it's amazing and it's good. You
Hmm.
know? Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, and this is not new. This is not new material. I mean, Paul, he uses this
Exactly.
language, and we see it
Exactly.
in scriptures. So this is not new. So but I
No,
appreciate you
no,
defining
exactly.
it
I'm
that
glad
way.
you said that. Yeah, I think the biblical writers think Paul was the sort of preeminent, writer who was getting all of that.
Yeah.
In Colossians, like on my wall in our living room, I have like three quotes up there. One's a Thich Nhat Hanh quote, where he says like the miracle is not to walk on water, the miracle is to walk on the green earth in the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a Rumi quote on the wall that says, you dance inside my chest where no one sees you,
Hmm.
about God.
Yeah.
But the other one is that Colossians 1:17 quote that says, in him all things hold together,
Hmm.
right? Those capture a lot of what I think about life.
Yeah.
And, but the, that, that Colossians quote speaks to it, but Paul saying, talking about Jesus ascending in order to fill the entire universe in Ephesians 4:10.
Hmm.
Or I love this quote. He writes, the light of the knowledge of God's glory in the face of Jesus Christ, Second
Hmm.
Corinthians 4:6. So the light of the knowledge of God's glory, right? This cosmic, ever-present, illuminating Christ, you could see in the face of Jesus,
Mm.
right? And that's when he talks about existing before all things. And he talks about the Son as the light of God's glory and is the imprint of God's being. Paul was already, I think, starting to work this out early on,
Hmm.
that's and, a lot of biblical writers and analysts will talk about this, but Paul doesn't really talk about the earthly life of Jesus.
Mm.
But he speaks of Christ and he speaks, I believe, the cosmic reality of Christ. And I think we're still finding ways for how to link those and finding the nexus of those things today. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. I'm glad.
Yeah.
Take the people back to the Bible. I know I can tell you're a good church kid. Make sure that people understand this is biblical. Kev's not up here
Yeah.
just saying stuff.
I mean, that's my audience. My audience,
Yeah, I
they
like
want to
that.
know.
No,
This is my
absolutely. That's
background.
great.
My background is I mean, my training. I took more Bible courses than any other course. No
Mm,
not as much theology, not spiritual formation, not ministry. I took a lot of Bible courses. I did take some of those other courses, but more Bible than anything.
yeah, we're
So
the
on that
opposites
note,
then.
yeah, yeah. You bring up this the fact that Jesus does, or Paul doesn't really talk about the life of Jesus, but we recognize that the life of Jesus is important, and that you especially emphasize this when you talk about the concrete Jesus.
Uh,
So tell me about the concrete Jesus.
mm. Yeah, there is. Someone can hear me talk about the cosmic Christ, and it could sound very like 1960s, 70s cultural
Mhm.
revolution, like Alan Watts. Like, it's cool,
Yeah. Uh
man.
huh.
Everything just is what it is, we can
Yeah.
just kind of hang out, and start a commune and eventually, destroy each other, even though we set
Mm.
out to create a perfect world.
Uh huh.
Like all them cult documentaries,
Uh
there's a
huh.
predictable arc in those.
Yeah.
Um, there is this cosmic reality that says somehow we are all loved equally and everything's okay right now.
Mhm.
I believe that is a deep, deep layer of the good news of Jesus. Yes. There is also, while the cosmic Christ in the book, I say the cosmic Christ tells us that we're safe,
Yep. Mhm.
and the liberating Jesus tells us that we need to be dangerous.
That's right. Yeah.
Dangerous to all of the systems and structures and forces that are working against the goodness the cosmic Christ is
Mhm.
inviting us into.
Mhm.
And not everybody is aware of this, but there is a concrete and liberating Jesus that I personally and many others have inherited from the Black prophetic tradition in the
Mhm.
United States that has been at work for a very long time and is still at work today. I would argue most people are introduced to what I call the abstract white Jesus.
Yeah.
A Jesus who doesn't seem very concerned with the issues of the day.
Mm-hmm.
A Jesus who somehow can transform radical acts of the gospel, radical social acts of the gospels into little personal nuggets of wisdom for your individual life today. A Jesus who seems quite comfortable with the status quo and really just wants us to be okay, even as we unconsciously and uncritically uphold and continue to reinforce a status quo that has consistently crushed and been leveraged against people of color and people on the margin since the inception of our country. That's the abstract. He's mostly apolitical, doesn't really want to get involved. No, that is an abstract white Jesus that will not lead us to liberation. Right. And I really believe that, like, those who have not been in need of liberation are not going to be the ones who lead us to liberation. Namely, people who look like me. They don't need it. You know, the country works well for white folks. The country works well for straight folks. Why would we somehow need a concrete liberating Jesus when the whole system's been built for us? No, this is why the Black prophetic tradition is so challenging and so important, because it doesn't allow us to just be okay with that abstract white Jesus, right? There is another liberating Jesus that you see in the Gospels. You know, like reading Cone, I'm like old school first, second wave Black and womanist theology, because I started studying probably, like, I don't know, 15 years ago or so when I was in school. When I first got introduced, it's like Cone and Kelly Brown Douglas and Katie Cannon and Renee. These are these are the people that just shaped my understanding of Jesus probably the most in life. And, you know, when Cone writes, you know, God was the God of history, the liberator of the oppressed from bondage. Jesus was not an abstract word of God, but God's word made flesh who came to set the prisoner free. Like this concrete Jesus that I've inherited, that I've given my life to follow, had his feet on the ground, his heart with the oppressed, and his eyes fixed on structures and systems that were getting in the way of life. Right? This is the Jesus that created the contours that I've given my life to. And, you know, Kelly Brown Douglas, in her book, The Black Christ and What's Faith Got to Do with It, which were huge, like in my own formation quite a long time ago. But Kelly Brown Douglas would argue that at the heart of Jesus's earthly ministry is his identification with the marginalized and his solidarity with the oppressed. That, through all of the, you know, symphony of voices within the Black and womanist traditions, you know, saying different things, but also having through threads without a doubt, much like liberation is, Kelly Brown Douglas naming that so simply and just going through it, it's everywhere. When you see that, it's everywhere in the scriptures, right? Let's take it back to the Bible. Everywhere in the Gospels are Jesus's parables, like, and then I got to have dinner with Pharaoh and meet some of his, with the emperor. We got to meet some of his friends. It was pretty cool. You know, no. The parties is always about those who are seeking status or in power not being included, not because they're not included, because they exclude themselves through their own exclusion of others.
Yeah.
And the people who are at the center are the ones you would never think. Every story is like that.
Yeah.
Every story is those who you think are in or out, and those who you think are out or in. Those who are at the best table have no idea what the hell's happening. And those who weren't even invited to the table are the ones who were at the center. Every story is like that.
Yeah.
And to me, Kelly Brown Douglas just opened up my eyes to see that, and that the concreteness of Jesus's earthly life. For me, I'm like, this is what it means to follow the way of Jesus. Do I identify with the marginalized naturally? Is my life oriented towards solidarity with the oppressed, or am I just too damn comfortable because for whatever reasons I have a place at the table? No, the liberating Jesus does not allow me to get comfortable over there. It challenges me and invites me and dares me to be dangerous in a world that wants to rock us to sleep. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this dangerous. You quote, I think it was Cornell West that said something
That's my guy right there.
about to follow Jesus. I don't know the exact quote. Man, first of all, in your book, you got a lot of good one-liners. I think that alone is worth the read. I think you quote quite a bit of people, and just the one-liners are great. You have a lot of good one-liners yourself, so I must say that too. But tell me about this idea of being dangerous.
You know, I didn't open it up, but I told a story in the book where when I graduated from Fuller in 2012, you know, president calls me, Kevin Sweeney, come across. Like, I didn't do an MDiv because I didn't want to do all the languages and more biblical stuff like you.
Uh-huh.
I did 2 MAs.
I didn't get an MDiv either.
Okay. I did 2 MAs at the same time because it basically meant like I could make up my own classes and just do whatever I wanted and study what I wanted.
Yeah.
And that's how I could focus on Black and womanist theology at Fuller, because there was a Black theology department, and I would just set up classes with the professor where you can make your own. And Dr. Ralph C. Watkins, who's like friend, mentor to this day, read this book for me and edited it while I was doing it. You know, we would make up classes and he'd be like, all right, just read. Like, I'd travel in the summer. He'd be like, just read these 12 books. He's like, I don't want to read. Don't write papers. I don't want to read. I'm like, cool, because I don't want to write them. So I'd basically read them. He's like, here you go. Good job.
Wow.
And so when I graduated from Fuller, you know, Dr. Mao at the time calls me across the stage, and out of my waistband, I pull a copy of Black Theology and Black Power from James Cone, sort of in its academic sense, sort of like this is the book that started this actual like genre of what became academic Black theology. You know, my mentor, Ralph C. Watkins, he makes sure to remind me that like, Black theology didn't start in 1968 and 69 with Cone. It started in the fields. It started with the slaves. It started with the first Africans who stepped foot on the land here, reflecting like, where is God and where are we? You know, so I just want to, it was codified and put in an academic sense right there. I just want to say that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I take out, you know, Black theology and Black power and hold it up to the audience as I walk across the stage. And then Dr. Mao gives me my diploma, or I don't even know. I never even had one. I never even went to get it, you know, but like I graduate. And for me, that was just a little poetic and prophetic demonstration saying to everybody, there has been a form of Eurocentricity and institutionalized white supremacy that has been embedded within this institution from its very inception. And by the way, it's not just about Fuller, it's about all theological education. Fuller is a particular expression of that, which is a bigger issue. Because when your curriculum is giving you, I don't even remember the language now, but essentially here's all the essential stuff you have to read. Okay, how many of those are women? How many of those are people of color? How many of those are Black folks? How many theologians are you reading that aren't just white, sort of middle class, bourgeois, or old, dead European white men, you know, et cetera? Well, we can say something without saying something. And when you tell me this is the foundation of your theological education, and it basically excludes any voices of people of color, any queer folks, whoever it is. Oh, so these are the people with truth. These are the arbiters of truth, right? Those in power in our context, namely white people, etc. So that book was a way for me to expose that and say, man, for me, without Kelly Brown Douglas, I don't have the fullness of Jesus. I don't. And honestly, neither do you. And it doesn't have to be Kelly Brown Douglas, but it has to be another voice who is daring you to see this liberating, dangerous prophetic ministry of Jesus that still invites us to do that today. So when I talk about being dangerous, it's like, yeah, that's a small version, but being dangerous means that we need to be dangerous to life diminishing institutions, structures, and forces today in the same way Jesus was. You know, like I've been like, I joked around when I've been on podcasts over the years. I'm like, if it was 2020 or 2021 and a white man or a white male or whoever in this weird Christian publishing industry, I say weird just because it's a funny thing to navigate, is talking about institutionalized white supremacy or systemic racism, you get a book deal. When I said that in 2010, all I got were awkward conversations with white folks. Trust me, that's all. And all I got was not being invited to preach at the next church or whatever it was. Now that's a small price to pay, but to be dangerous wherever I go means to be honest wherever I go, and I have to surrender those outcomes to God, even if I don't get invited to preach there, even if it affects my money, even if it affects these relationships, even if it affects these things. The truth is bigger than what's going to make me more comfortable and have a place in all of these places. And for me, that's a small price to pay. It's a real one, but it's small. Like when I talked about Doc Watkins, even for him today, because I respect him so much, because even talking about Black and womanist theology at Fuller, which I'm sure was a lot of challenges for him. He went on because he moved to Columbia Theological Seminary in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And he's really the past 5 to 7 years, maybe longer, been pushing inclusion for LGBTQ folks in the Black church.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I know for him, he could have just been like, I'm tenured. I
Yeah.
write about liberation theology. I do this other stuff. I
Mm-hmm.
get X amount of preaching gigs a year. I'm good, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But I know because I've talked to him, that's affected relationships he's had.
Yeah, of course.
Creating documentaries about
Mm-hmm.
inclusion in the Black church, really highlighting Black, gay and LGBTQ plus Black folks who are preachers in their churches. Like he
Mm-hmm.
keeps doing the work because the same liberating Jesus that would require or demand or call him to talk about what he was talking about at Fuller, he feels, I'm sure, knowing him, is still daring him to be dangerous and to what about these folks right here?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What about them? And
Yeah.
so to be dangerous is to speak truth in a world that doesn't want to hear it
Yeah.
and to accept the consequences, whatever they come,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, these are small prices to pay.
Yeah.
Diane Nash and the people in the student nonviolent coordinating, committee back in the civil rights era. Man, what, like Fannie Lou Hamer, who's like, to me is one
Mm-hmm.
of the ultimate Christians. Like they were being dangerous at a time where they were getting their ass beat by
Yeah.
police.
Mm-hmm.
People were getting killed.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's like, oh, I might lose a couple friends.
Yeah.
I
Or
might have white
followers.
folks who don't want to invite me to dinner, or
Yeah.
whatever.
Uh-huh.
Or like,
Yeah.
I might never be in the little boys club and go to these churches. What is that? Come on, I can
Mm-hmm.
handle that. Like,
Yeah.
that's a part of the truth telling. That's nothing compared to what's been happening for 400 years here.
Yeah.
So I think while the cosmic Christ says you're safe, I'm like, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The liberating Jesus is like, but everything's not okay here, and there's work to be done.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm.
I can't ignore that. I have to let myself be haunted by that for the rest of my life because I can get comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I don't face the same things other people face in the country as a person of privilege, but I have to keep hearing that call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to be dangerous is to raise questions, right? And not just accept what is. Maybe poke at some things and to be inquisitive, I think, and not just embrace the movements of our society.
Mm,
I appreciate
mm,
that
mm,
idea and that perspective.
mm, mm, mm,
So why is there typically a tension between the cosmic Christ and the concrete Jesus?
mm. I mean, a part of that, theologically always gets at the idea of like the particular in the universe, God and
Yeah.
Jesus
Mm-hmm.
incarnation. But the other tension is the practical part of our lives when we talk about the real concreteness of things. And what does the cosmic Christ tell us? We're safe.
Mm-hmm.
We can rest. We don't have to overwork ourselves. We don't have to prove ourselves. We don't have to hustle for our worth. We don't have to grind into the point where it makes us unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
Because the cosmic Christ is like, when can you dare to trust that faithfulness is enough? It's a
Mm-hmm.
lifelong journey.
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay, that's good. We can rest, but there's also work to be done.
Mm-hmm.
There's questions to ask, like you say, things to poke at, people to
Yeah.
love, compassion to
Yeah.
extend, things to write, ways
Mm.
to use our voice, right,
Yeah.
etc. And the tension between action and rest is a lifelong one. And I think based on personalities, most of the time, we are either more oriented towards action and
Uh-huh.
doing or kind of stillness and thinking and resting.
That's
You
right.
know,
Mm-hmm.
my wife, which is why we're a good, one of the many reasons why we work well together as partners. My wife is one of the most powerful human beings I've ever seen. She has seemingly endless reserves of energy.
Mm.
She used to be in the entertainment industry, and the stories of how she got into it is like, oh, this could be like a movie. Like
Mm.
calling Viacom and MTV 20 times and getting names and setting up meetings because everyone thinks she can move from idea to implementation faster than anyone I've ever seen in
Wow.
my life. She is truly remarkable. Owns her own business, has her own private practice. She's a marriage and family therapist, runs
Okay.
it, does everything herself, like billing. She can just keep going.
Mm-hmm.
So present to our kids, working so hard. Me, on the other hand, I'm more calculated.
Mm.
I'm more like I move when the time's right, and I can focus on one thing and
Uh-huh.
etc. And I'm good at, hey, it's okay to rest. It's okay to
Uh-huh.
enjoy. It's okay to stop. And so my lifelong message to my Enneagram 2 wife who knows how to work hard, and this is the message of the good news for all of us, is, hey, babe, it's okay to rest.
Yeah.
And my wife's long time message to me is like, hey, babe, there's shit to be done. So
Yep.
I asked you to give me that email so I could send it to my account. It's tax
Uh-huh.
season right now. So it's great you're resting, but send me that,
Yep.
please.
Get moving.
And I think that is always, I think for people who are more prone to neuroticism and overworking themselves, it is a lifelong journey to let themselves slow down because it's very difficult
Mm.
to be still.
Yeah.
Somebody like me who's more introverted and who's more in their head naturally, it is a lifelong journey to have the courage to move out of my head and into the incarnational messiness of life,
Mm-hmm.
because that is less comfortable for me.
Yeah.
I want to think and talk about things.
Yeah.
To be close. That's why embracing the role of lead pastor took a lot of courage for me. It wasn't something I wanted
Mm-hmm.
because I'm showing up every day in ways that I have to intentionally do. My wife and people with her personality, they just go there without thinking about it. I have to choose to do it because I want to
Mm-hmm.
be alone. I have to choose to do it because I'd rather be on my own. So I think depending on the personality, the good news is like, please slow down, or the good news is like, take those risks and get involved.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are lifelong messages that we need to hear more depending on our own makeup and how we read our own
Yeah.
life. Yeah,
And even as we change, like,
absolutely.
right, as we receive more rest, and okay, maybe it's time to pour out. And
Uh,
as I was reading your book, I kept thinking about like these two things they're intertwined, and maybe the receiving of the cosmic Christ is the inhale, and the
uh,
practicing of the concrete Jesus is the exhale, right?
absolutely,
It's a
dude.
rhythm.
That exactly. I honestly never didn't write that in the book. I think I
Uh,
said that in one of these interviews, like what you just
mm,
said.
mm,
That is exactly to me how natural that flow
hmm.
should be. The Christ is the universal, just breathe it in, we're all okay.
Yeah.
The concrete Jesus, the breathe it out, is in all of the ways it's concretely not okay. This is our work in the world.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's good.
Mm.
Yeah.
So more on the concrete, trying to get into your personal, who you are. What are some of the hobbies that you are a part of? Or what are some of your
Oh
hobbies?
man. I growing up playing basketball very seriously, like pretty much giving my life to when I was young, but I quit when
Mm.
I was 18, like I described.
Yeah.
And I really didn't play it much for like 20 years, to be honest.
Mm.
I was like, I'm done with that. Like every once in a while I would get an itch and I'd play for like a month and be like, no, I'm good. So
Hmm.
when I moved here at 18, I started surfing because
Mm.
I moved to Hawaii. I'm like, okay. I'm like, I'm not playing basketball. I'm not selling weed. I'm not getting high. Like, so literally everything I ever did, I'm not doing. What am I supposed to do
Yeah.
with a day? What do
Uh-huh.
people do? I didn't even know.
Uh-huh.
And then I started surfing at that time. So yeah, surfing, or being oriented towards the ocean. Like
Hmm.
people probably don't understand how much people's lives are oriented around the ocean in Hawaii.
Mm. Mm.
Surfing, paddling,
Uh-huh.
larger outrigger canoes, diving, catching your own fish,
Mm.
fishing. Like people are really in the ocean here. Like it's
Huh.
their life here. Like
Yeah.
there's a very well-known waterman out here, very well-known Hawaiian from the west side out here. He's also very involved in like production safety for movies, like
Mm.
jet skis. Whenever things are filming here, he's a big head of a lot of that.
Hmm.
And it speaks to Hawaii's orientation and understanding of the water, but he's like, in our world, this is not verbatim. He's like, in our world, it feels like we're disconnected by land, but actually we're all connected by water
Mm.
when you think about the globe.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
That speaks to the consciousness here, right? How central that
Yeah.
is. So yeah, the ocean, our family's a beach family. I surf, my wife surfs, so that's a big thing. My son is 6 and he's so into basketball, which seriously makes me so happy. Like I'm
Uh-huh.
coaching his team right now, and he's an animal.
Mm.
Like an animal. Like I'm like, bro, you
Wow.
need to chill out on these other kids. I don't tell him that because I want him to
Uh-huh.
go hard, but I'm like, this is getting out of hand,
Wow. Yeah.
And so I just was like, you know what? I gotta start like hooping a little bit again because he's kind
Mhm.
of got me in that mode. So I
Mm.
just this week played for the first time in a couple years.
Mm.
So yeah, I'm like, I had to accept once I had kids, Wesley, I'm like, my brain is too tired to read. It's one of the hard things I had to accept. Just that season of my life, like I can't read at the end of the day. I'm too
Mm.
tired from
Uh-huh.
kids and everything. So yeah, surfing, a little bit of basketball now, and I'm in that stage of taking kids to different practices. So yeah, those are the main things
That's
physically
awesome.
that I do. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
I mentioned this earlier, but this is a side note. I lived in Hawaii for 2 years. I lived on
Oh,
Oahu.
really?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's where I'm at.
I was in Eva Beach,
Were
and
you
I
like a
went to
military kid or no?
yeah, my dad finished his military career there before he went back to pharmacy school. So,
Nice.
yeah, I went to James Campbell High School. I'm not sure if you're familiar
Okay.
with that
Yeah,
school.
of course. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
What? So what year did you finish there?
I was there from 2011 to 2012
Okay,
ish,
2012.
and I
Yeah, I'm
didn't
trying to think.
graduate from the school. I was a junior when I left to come back to the mainland.
Okay, yeah, because there's some kids I used to surf with. They might be a little bit younger than you. A kid named EJ Mitsui and all of his
Mm,
friends. They were great surfers back in the day on the west
okay.
side. Yeah.
Mm,
But yeah, I like so the family. I was talking about Brian K. Alana. They live up in Makaha when I
okay.
talked about that quote. So, yeah, that for people who don't know, Eva Beach is like beginning of the west side.
Huh?
Really, kind of like sunnier, very dry part of the island. Dry for us. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
cool. Yeah,
Yep. I
yeah,
remember a
that's
lot of
dope.
dirt. We have a lot of dirt on our
Oh
tracks.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
I remember that.
Yeah, that's
And my
cool.
sister, she lives on the Big Island.
Oh, nice.
She's just finished up a degree at Hilo University,
Oh,
I guess,
nice.
on the Big Island.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
the
so
UH over there. Oh, that's
yeah,
great.
so
That's cool,
she's
man.
still there. Yep. So one thing you do, two things you do well in this book is talking about the Christian mysticism movement and liberation theology. And
Uh,
it's just so cool to see a book that references James Cone, but also Richard Rohr. You know what I mean? And just kind of brings those voices together. And you do a good job at
you just describe my whole personality, in those two.
yeah, well, you do a great job at reflecting that in the book and bringing those worlds together, and I really
Uh,
appreciate that. So tell
uh,
me more about liberation theology and Christian mysticism and the relationship between the two approaches to the
uh,
faith.
yeah, the mystics are probably the small stream within the larger flow of the great tradition of Christianity that I most identify with,
Hmm.
and kind of when I hear them, I hear myself.
Yeah.
When I was in Bible college, they weren't giving me Richard Rohr, believe it or not. But when I
Hmm.
first read him at 23-ish, maybe, I was like, oh, he's seen what I've seen. Oh, he talks like this. Oh, he's saying what I've experienced, and he's
Yeah.
calling me further because obviously he's further on the journey.
Hmm.
But for him, it wasn't doctrinal
Hmm.
primarily, right? It wasn't conceptual. It was this deep experience, and there's this flow, and there's this inner awareness, and there's this inner
Hmm.
spaciousness, and
Hmm.
all. I'm like, this is it. He knows, and that's true for many other Christian mystics. Thomas Merton, of course,
Uh-huh.
like leading up to Rohr, who I think, for me, Fannie Lou Hamer, MLK, Thomas Merton, like these are Christians in the 20th century in the US. I'm like, all right, for me, I'm like, those are the ones, you
Mm.
know?
Hmm.
And again, it holds together the liberation and the
Yeah.
mist, and because that's what I'm drawn to. And that's what I feel like makes sense of who I am in the world. And I love the mystics. The mystics are mysterious characters. They're interesting people. They're
Yeah.
strange people. That's why I love them. I love weird people.
Uh-huh.
And like the mystic is somebody who can embody pure acceptance of that
Mm.
which is.
Wow. Yeah. Hmm.
Just accepting the world for exactly what it is right now without resistance, without denial, without needing to hide things, how ugly it is. No, the mystic can say yes to reality in every moment.
Hmm.
It might take a few minutes, it might take some time to accept, but mystics can embody a very pure form of acceptance.
Mm.
That is a tremendous amount of faith required to do that.
Yeah, that's right.
And, the mystic is the one who knows that death is the key to life.
Mm.
we're always perpetually dying because we're also perpetually trusting resurrection as we move into Resurrection Sunday this week, you know? Um, I joke around and say the mystic is the one who will give you the keys to a gate that doesn't exist. So
Wow.
even for me pastorally, right? I mean, I thought all this as a pastor. So think about the church, you know, this is the imagination I had pastorally. And I joke around when I talk about the mystics will give you keys to a gate that doesn't exist, where at 21, 22, when we think developmentally, you might say, oh, here's this ritual we do. Here's this thing we do. You know, you come here on a Sunday, you read these things, you do this, and that sort of creates this sacred moment to open you up to God. And someone thinks, oh, those rituals and those things maybe are essential. They're the keys to the gate that now allows the Spirit to flood into our lives or the Spirit to be present. And they might need to believe that right there. That's fine with me. But I'm like, 5 to 7 years later, I might lean over and whisper to them, like, you know, we don't actually have to do this, right? Like, all these rituals we have, confession is not for God, it's for us.
That's right.
I would argue even when you get to the heart of even some of the main rituals and sacraments, like baptism isn't for God, it's for us.
That's right.
Baptism is for the sacred imagination of the human being, because that movement helps our mind, our heart, and our body align with we just crossed over and made a decision. But I would argue nothing happens ontologically to a human being when you get baptized.
I would agree.
People might, you know, traditional soteriology is like you accept Jesus, you know, the Holy Spirit somehow comes into your life, you're regenerated as if there's some ontological shift and now you're a Christian and saved. I'm like, no. Like, I get that, and if that's helpful to believe that, to trust the journey right now, I don't really care. But no, whatever's true has always been true. You know, you've never been separated. You're waking up more and more to that, which is already true. And the mystics are like the little tricksters that keep on telling us that over and over. And I love them, and they're great. And I find myself within that, not just, and for me, not just Christian mystics, the broader perennial tradition of the great Buddhist mystics and inner spiritual teachers like Mirabai Star today, or the great Buddhists like Thich Nhat Hanh, who was friends with MLK back in the day. These are amazing people who are in the same flow. The mystics don't argue about the best directions to the ocean. They just swim in it and invite people to come along.
That's right.
You know, that's how I think about beliefs and experience, spiritual intelligence and spiritual experiences. I tell a story in the book where there's friends in Hawaii. You know, they're going on a small hike to a waterfall, and out of the 5 friends, one of them is very like anxiously holding a map because he's never been there before. And he's like, oh, I don't know if we took the right turn. I don't know if this is the right way. I think we're supposed to go here. And he's calling them back. And this person is so obsessed with being accurate with their map that they're unable to take in the beauty of the trees they're walking by. They're unable to just be present with the communion of the sacredness of friendship, you know, which in my life, I value friendship so much, you know, and connection. And, you know, he's all anxious and neurotic. He's not present. When they finally get to the waterfall, one friend just grabs the map and runs and jumps into the waterfall, right? Like, bro, stop already, you know? And then the guy's like, oh no, my map. And the guy who jumped in was like, you don't need the map because we're already here. The mystics are like, we're here.
Wow.
The map is helpful insofar as it's leading you to the ocean, but it is not the ocean itself. The ocean is direct knowing of God. So yeah, I think the mystics always do versions of that for us. And again, when you think about the nexus, the link between that and the liberating tradition is the liberating Jesus, especially for privileged folks, is always that provocative, challenging, sometimes annoying, you know, when you want to just chill and be indifferent and turn my head and not think about, you know, that man from Maryland who was due process taken to El Salvador, and they're acting like they can't get him back, and the absolute disgusting nature of that whole thing and the injustice of it. The liberating Jesus is like, don't turn away. Your humanity, the fullness of your humanity is contingent upon paying attention. When me and my privilege wants to be like, I'm tired, dog. Like I don't even want to think about this. The liberating Jesus always calls us back to the concrete, to my neighbor, to the people around me, to my kids, to my wife, to a system. The liberating Jesus says the fullness of your life is not just in resting in that you're loved. That is a big part of it. The fullness of your humanity is then allowing that love to fuel you to work that love out concretely for the sake of those around me, especially starting with the vulnerable. And so to me, it's always the cosmic crisis saying, yes, everything's okay. And the liberating Jesus saying, no, everything's not okay. And it's both of those.
That's right. Wow.
That's a paradox for that.
It is. How does this sit with you? So we're liberated so that we can be mystics. And we are mystics so that we can participate in the liberating work of others.
Yeah, exactly.
Like all of that is connected, right? There, like I said, it's the breathing, the inhale, exhale. Like this is a rhythm.
Yeah, I mean, I transitioned recently into hospice care. I don't know if you know that, but yeah, so I transitioned to be a chaplain for hospice.
Yeah.
And one of my primary ways I think about hospice work, which was also true pastorally, is I am always mirroring to others that which the Spirit perpetually and eternally mirrors to me and to all of us. There's a set of eyes at the universe and a presence that offers me compassion. And then I offer that to people. There's a set of eyes at the universe that offers me perpetual affirmation of who I am, and I offer that to people. So when you talk about that, it's, yes, you are liberated, and then that naturally leads towards liberating work. You are cared for so you can actually care for others. It's just the liberating Jesus in the Black prophetic tradition helps us define the others, helps us define our neighbor. Because other people wouldn't argue with that. It's just without the prophetic liberating Jesus, their idea of neighbor is much more tribal, like ethnic and tribal, than it is universal and global.
Yeah.
And I believe that's what prophetic liberating traditions do, is they dare us to see the liberation in a more radically inclusive way outside of just our tribe. Yeah, that's the call. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, there's a question you asked multiple times in the book, and I think it's tied to what we're saying here, but you might want to expand on this more. So the question is, does God need the credit to be fully present? This is a question you keep bringing up, and I appreciate the way you respond to the question, but I wanted to know more about, like, thinking about what we're saying now. You want to unpack that more?
Yeah. Well, do you remember more about that part?
It was two different parts. Well,
I remember this section. Okay.
Yep. The part I'm talking about was on page 83.
Okay.
And what you're saying is, I think you're talking about just kind of recognizing that we don't have to say Jesus's name. You know what I mean? Like the work is being done. Like the presence is still present, even if we don't name it. Does that make sense? I think that's some of the stuff I was reading.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I thought about that a lot in my life, and pastorally as well. It might be a different section, but it gets at a similar thing. I'm like, imagine two different people. One person is doing a lot of explicitly Christian things. They're singing CCM worship songs. They're going to church on a Sunday. They're involved in a small group or whatever things we associate now with church. They're doing all the churchy stuff. But let's say during a time of worship, during a time of collective and, singing, while this person is using explicitly Christian language, involved in explicitly Christian activities, their heart is still closed down. They're still bitter. They're unforgiving. They're not practicing humility. They still need to remain the center of their lives. They're totally in control, which means they're restricted and closed off. Which to me, it is not that the Spirit is not moving. It's that they have too many things that are getting in the way of the Spirit moving in their life in a healing way. That's how I think about it. Okay, let's look at person 2. They're in some sort of a social setting, no explicitly Christian language, not an explicitly Christian event, no explicit Christian symbols involved in the process. It could be a social event. It could be a concert. They could be by themselves walking through a forest, listening to music. It doesn't matter. That person without the language, without the name of Jesus, without the structure of sort of public Christianity, somehow has gotten to a point in their life where they're open. There's humility.
Yeah.
It's not them, it's me. I'm the one who did this. That fell apart because of me. It's not me blaming other people. It's me claiming the agency of my own life and saying, I did this. I made a mistake. I need more. I'm not happy. I'm restless right now. All of these like sort of questions that arise in the midst of real honesty. And that person somehow is the walls are coming down, the guards around their heart, all the defense mechanisms psychologically they use to protect themselves the first 30 years, all these things are weakening. And in that moment, I believe the Spirit is flowing into them in a healing, recreating, restorative, what we would say transformative way. Does Jesus need the credit for that in order for the Spirit to be active in that person's life? I don't think so. Does this, and the other person is giving Jesus the credit, but the Spirit is not active, and it's not because of the Spirit, it's because they are in the way. I've thought that many times the issue in our spiritual lives of formation is not that God is on the way, it's that we are getting in the way.
That's right.
That's the pastor in me who just loves to say quotes like that, you know?
Yeah.
But so for me in those moments, like, you know, I think I write about it in that section you're talking about, or one of the sections, you know, a man with leprosy comes to Jesus, Jesus heals him and says, be clean, then says like, don't tell anybody. You know, it's like Jesus is like, you don't need to name this. And another one, they're like, Lord, Lord, when we call, you know, this not verbatim, when we said your name, and he's like, basically, I wasn't doing that. One has the presence and the healing. Jesus is like, don't worry about the name. The other one has the name. He's like, there was no real work that was going on there. And so I think about that as the universality of the cosmic Christ of like, anytime someone forgives, they're doing the Christ journey. Anytime someone practices humility, they're doing the Christ journey. Anytime someone refuses to take control of a situation and instead surrenders the situation, whether they're saying to God or to life, or we don't even know why they're willing to do that.
Yeah.
But if they're surrendering the need to control and just trusting what is, they're doing the Christ journey. The issue is not whether or not the language of Jesus or biblical language is attached to it. The issue is the substance of their life when they're actually doing it. You know, it's like if someone comes to the edge of a cliff and says, oh, I know there's moments of faith, you know, where if I trust God and if I walk off the cliff, a new path will be built, like metaphorically. You know, if they do that and they're Christian, they say, I'm going to trust the God of Abraham who let him out. I'm going to trust, you know, the God of Jesus. I'm going to trust that their biblical knowledge and their trust of God through the Bible is empowering them to take a risk, and they do it and a new path is created. That's amazing. I would argue the other person who comes to the edge of a cliff with no biblical knowledge, no biblical narratives to shape them, but for some reason says, I'm going to take this risk and do this. I think the Spirit is just as active and at work creating their future as the Spirit is creating the future of the person who's using biblical language. That is the beauty of the cosmic Christ and the universality of God's love. And I've seen like, this one's using a Christian map and they're doing the journey. Fantastic.
Yeah.
The other person without the Christian map, if they're doing the same journey, the same internal mechanisms of forgiveness, trust, whatever it is, the same thing's happening.
That's right.
It is, you know?
And connected to that, you end the book by talking about waking up. And so my question is like, how do we wake up? And based on what you're saying, we have something to do with that. I mean, the Spirit is working. The Spirit is always working, but there's a role that we play in that, right? But so tell me your thoughts. How do we go about waking up?
Yes, I believe, you know, awakening, waking up, and the natural transformation that comes from that comes more from disidentifying with identities, letting go of things and removing things within us than it does adding anything else.
Yeah.
It's a spirituality of subtraction.
That's right. Yeah.
It's more about letting go than it is adding anything when it comes to waking up. So if this person shaped by the Christian tradition, which I think is for, especially for Pentecostals, heavily relying on like peak experiences, like a deliverance night, another conference. Like, who
Yeah.
wants to do this? Sometimes, and those things aren't bad. I believe those things can also be rituals that can help open you up. But the issue is not that, it's you being open. But there's times where I'm like, hey, instead of doing devotions, why don't you sit in silence and ask yourself some hard questions about the grief you're carrying? What am I feeling right now?
Yeah.
Oh, I was really offended by that. And I thought by 28 my life would be here, and it's not. And if I'm honest, a part of me is upset about that. I'm angry at life, and I think I'm angry at God. It would be more transformative to name those things, sit with them, allow them to have a voice within you, feel the emotions attached to them, because then and only then, after you name it and feel the fullness of them, can you actually let them go.
Yeah,
And once
that's
I
right.
do that, you're creating more space within you. So I think a lot of the real work is the removal, the naming of, and the removal of, and the healing of things that are getting in the way. Because if the mystics are right, like in that famous Jacob story in the dream, that, it was like God was here all along, that's the discovery. I think that's something we all need to discover over and over again. And so spiritual practices, silence and solitude, do you know how to, like, for me, I can name concrete practices, but one of the biggest things is learning to listen to your own life. A lot of pastors know how to read the Bible, but they don't know how to read their own hearts.
Wow. Yep.
They know how to read the sacred text of Scripture. They don't know how to read the sacred text of their interior unfolding life. Where am I right now?
Yeah.
What's happening? Is this a season of moving forward and courage? Is this a season of letting go? Is this a season of resurrection? Is this a season of death? And I have to accept the death and stay in that liminal space long enough for the Spirit to do its work. So waking up is always comes from direct experience of God. And that comes more from stillness, removal, paying attention, being aware, than it is grasping, controlling, or gaining
Yeah.
more knowledge. It does not come from that. It's not a constricting thing. It's a opening up. It's
That's right.
like awakening is an uncoiling. It's an inner spaciousness opening up, and that comes with time and resting and learning to breathe and learning to pray and learning to sit in silence. Like, everybody doesn't have to sit in silence, but I would just, as an observation, I don't see any great mystic and lover and knower of God historically who wasn't in silence.
That's right. Yeah.
There just seems to be a pattern there. So yeah, I think it's a lot less doing and a lot more allowing. It's not the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And willing to let go of so much that you let go of your words. And like you said in this book many
Exactly.
times, you're letting go of your ideas and your concepts.
Exactly.
You're not raising these concepts and these ideas up as Lord, but you're letting them go.
Exactly. Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Well, if I got your book, if I read it right, this is the main point I walked away with. It's pretty long. It's like a Pauline sentence.
Oh, hello. Here we go. Come on.
So the gospel is an invitation. The gospel is an invitation to participate in the liberating work of ourselves and those around us by embracing the cosmic Christ and embodying the way of the concrete Jesus. Is that it?
I think that's it. I should change my that should change my back cover. It's too late. I'll tell my publisher to change the back cover. It's too late. I've just added something in the end.
Man.
No,
And on that
exactly.
note, I had this digital version. So does the physical copy, are there footnotes in there?
No.
Because I say that because you quote so many people. I'm like, I want to know where this comes from, and I can always Google it.
Yeah.
Of course, I can chat GPT it, right?
Yes.
But
Yes.
I was just wondering about that.
It would be tough for me to explain the whole process, but all my other books have references cited, and this one does, and the quotes are all internal to the book. Yeah.
Well, at least you attribute the quotes to the author.
Oh
so.
yeah, I'm attributing them. It's just there's reasons why that didn't work out. Yeah. That's funny you asked that. See, the Bible college kids, the biblical studies, they pay attention to the details. But that's how you learn. It's like we're all chasing footnotes.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh, they quoted them. Now I got to read that. They quoted them. Now I got to read that too.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's informed all of my library.
Yeah. And I will say for people listening off top, a few books, just from, you think about the Black prophetic tradition and then the mystics that come to my mind Kelly Brown Douglas's The Black
Mm,
Christ.
mm,
James Cone's, I would say Black Theology and Black Power. It's not his
mm,
most famous just because it was the first.
mm-hmm.
But Kelly Brown Douglas is The Black Christ, and honestly, her book, What's Faith Got to Do with It? Those and one of Cone's
Mm,
book. People like The Cross and the Lynching Tree. That
yeah.
was much later, much
Mm-hmm.
significant later, but great book. But
Mm-hmm.
I just like the early stuff because that's what I was shaped by.
Yeah.
And then for the mystics, I would say, these are just first things off top that are shaping me. Richard Rohr's Everything Belongs.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Got that. Good stuff.
Thomas Merton's New Seeds of Contemplation.
Mm-hmm. We're going through that as a
And,
church right now.
oh my gosh, I love
On
that. It's
a
great.
group, Wednesday group.
Oh, it's so good. It's so good. He's so ahead of his time. So
Yeah,
like truly at the leading edge of consciousness in the
that's
West
right.
at that point. And also a current author who I love, and I just started reading the past, like, I don't know, maybe 3 to 4 years, who's also connected with Roar's CAC is Mirabai Starr.
Mm,
Mirabai Starr is an inner spiritual teacher. She's connected with Roar and them at the CAC, but she wrote a book called Wild Mercy.
mm,
It's about like the divine feminine. I forget the subtitle, but Wild Mercy is the title. Mirabai Starr, Wild Mercy. When I read that, I was just like, wow.
mm,
Because like, if I'm ever introduced to a new writer that I love, like it's really meaningful. And I saw her
mm-hmm,
work, I was like, this is so. Mirabai Starr's Wild Mercy is phenomenal, written like 3 or 4 years ago.
mm.
That's just for the listeners.
Awesome. Those are some great
Yeah, man.
recommendations, and I
Yeah,
look forward to checking some of those
yeah,
out.
yeah.
Man, I so appreciate this conversation. I appreciate your energy. I appreciate your wisdom, and I
Mm,
appreciate this book. I can't wait for it to come
mm,
out and for others to be exposed to some great ideas and
mm,
some great things. I mean, as you're reading through it, you're not just getting information, right? You're
mm,
getting a framework, you're getting maybe a posture to have, right? I mean, there's just a
mm,
lot that's going on as you're reading
mm,
it. And not just that, like it's a bouncing ground for more writers in the contemplative space, the mystical space, and the liberative theology space. So I
mm.
really appreciate that and the work that you've done.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you, Wesley. I enjoy this so good.
Thank you again for listening to this conversation with me and my friend Kevin. Like I mentioned before, he just wrote a new book and it is now out. The book is called The Cosmic Christ and Concrete Jesus. It's an easy read, highly accessible, and the way that he writes is very reminiscent to me of Rob Bell and his posture. Whenever I read a Rob Bell book, I kind of just fly through it, and Rob Bell has a way of talking about heavy things in very simple ways. So I would highly recommend this book, and I would love to be a conversation partner with you about the book if you do decide to read it. I would like to end this conversation with a prayer based on the discussion that we had. God of mystery and mercy, you are both the vastness that holds us and the nearness that walks beside us. Form Christ in us, not as an idea, but as a way of living with courage, compassion, and clarity. May we awaken to your love, stand with the hurting, and rest in the truth that we are already held.